Hi, I'm Bob Layton, comic book creator, writer, and artist. Growing up, I read a lot of comics, but probably my favorite was Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man was unique to all other characters because he was a kid pretending to be a man. And I found that very fascinating because I was a kid who wanted to pretend to be a man. I wasn't the very first to create a fanzine, but I was the very first to create a regular monthly fanzine. Back in the early 70s, there was no internet. There was no way for fans to connect other than there was a newspaper published out of Illinois called The Buyer's Guide to Comics. It was a weekly newspaper, and anybody who was a comic fan subscribed to it. Now, I started financing my my education after high school by selling back issues of comics through that. And I created this little catalog. And through that catalog, I met some more fans who lived in Indianapolis. So we started networking. I wasn't the only geek in Indianapolis in 1971, you know? It was like, imagine my joy. From there, the catalog turned into a fan magazine where everybody, all the various fans that I had now connected with would contribute to it. And I would do art for it, and other people would do art for it. And then we would sell it through the Buyer's Guide. And that's kind of how it all started. And what happened was, as it continued to grow, I would send 25 copies off to all the major publishers of comics, hoping that somebody would pass them out in the bullpen or whatever. And sure enough, they did. It became, and we started getting contributions from professionals at that point. But that's how my artwork finally got noticed, and I got an offer to become an apprentice. So I packed up everything and went out east and started my life as a background artist for Wally Wood and Dick Giordano. Well, I got my hands on Iron Man purely by another one of those mind-numbing coincidences I always talk about. I had left DC Comics after working a year there, and I brought David Michelinie with me, who was my writing partner at DC. And back then, in those days, when on the newsstand, they kind of knew 6 months in advance which books were going to sell and which ones were going to be canceled. So Iron Man was one of the books that was slated to be canceled, but they had a contract to do 6 more issues. So the policy was to move the A-list guys off and then put us on to finish out the run. That way we got a chance to train on the job. We got to do stuff. And Iron Man was all one of those characters that I used to make my own comic books when I was a kid. In fact, Doom Quest, one of my more famous stories, was something I did at 11 years old on notebook paper. So never throw anything out. I jumped at the chance. I convinced Dave, trust me, take this. And I asked them, can I change a few things? And they're like, well, we don't care. We're going to cancel the book. Do what you want. And so 6 issues later, it went from being near cancellation to becoming one of their top 10 books. Because we created the Tony Stark that you know now. And the rest is history. I first went to Hollywood in 2007 to work on the Iron Man special features for the very first movie, which was kind of fun. I got to sit there and sit by the fireplace, and Uncle Bob tells you about the history of Iron Man. They used me to talk about the history of the comic up till the time of the movie. But while I was out there, I met a whole bunch of people, and I really got the bug to do something new. I had done everything in comics. I had owned 2 comic book companies. I was a writer, editor, publisher. I'd done everything but put the staples in the damn books, right? So I was looking for a new challenge. There was nothing left in comics for me to do, and the idea of motion pictures and television became very, very fascinating. So after Iron Man 2 was over, I actually got a call from Nicktoons, Nickelodeon. And the guy who was the showrunner there, Brandon Allman, said, hey, look, we've been stealing most of your ideas for the Iron Man Armored Adventures TV show anyway. He goes, I thought, if you're out here, why don't you just write some yourself? So my very first job was writing Iron Man for Nicktoons. Then I got an offer to do work for Cinemax on a show called Femme Fatales. What happened was I met Michael Olmos, who introduced me to Edward James Olmos, who became my mentor in Hollywood. And with Eddie, I worked on a number of pictures and a lot of spec scripts and things like that. But Eddie taught me how to transition from comics to film. He was such a great mentor and a great friend, and I love him. I wanted to get a shout out to Ed here too, because he was such a major influence in my life, and I was so grateful to have him with me. So I have my own production company now. I moved back to Florida, started my own production company, as you know, because we fight for rights, for film rights here in Florida all the time, and you're with me in that fight. So I have my own production company here, and looking to do film and television here in the state of Florida.